Attention passengers, we've now reached our destination.
Welcome to the Travel Podyssey, a travel podcast based on lesser-known destinations. I am your host, Jake Twargoski, and on this show, we will give an overview of the destination and discuss our reactions to them. Each episode will feature a different guest, so get your passports ready, and let's go on a Travel Podyssey. Good day all, and you're about to witness the initial Travel Podyssey. Why did I say initial? This is the first ever Travel Podyssey. Anyway, let's get into the expectations as this is the first show. Think of it as an orientation. First thing, I will introduce the destination. That is going to be an overlooked destination, so it's probably not going to be a popular destination like Disney World or Yellowstone National Park. And then I'm also going to introduce the guests for that show. The guests will be based on my experience and their experience of the destination we are going to talk about. And then we will introduce the destination. That is going to be where we talk about the overview of the destination, including their historical landmarks, the food, and the other stuff they are known for. Then the second half of the presentation will be about our reactions. Did it exceed our expectations? How did we feel about it? And what we did not know about the destination or the region they're in. So that is what the show is going to be about. To kick off the first episode, we're going to hear a national anthem. That will help narrow the process down. Welcome back from listening to the national anthem of a country. If you guessed it correctly, it is the United Kingdom, one of my favorite countries. Speaking of the UK, I have picked out the very first guest for the Travel Podyssey. At the time of recording, I am the WMUL-FM traffic director, and I also have an assistant traffic director, who is also part of the FM88 Sports team, and that is Rhys Owens. Rhys, thank you for joining with us today.
Hello, Jake. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being with us, Rhys. Why not tell me a little bit about yourself?
As you said, my name is Rhys Owens. Like Jake mentioned, I am the assistant traffic director here at WMUL. I also work on the FM88 Sports staff, doing all sorts of things like calling games, doing sports on the news, looking to expand my role here at WMUL as time goes on, and eventually maybe take over Jake's position once he's gone. I'm a Huntington, West Virginia native. I enjoy reading, working out, getting tattoos, and traveling, much like my friend Jake here. And as he mentioned, there's a reason I'm on this podcast. It's because my father is born and raised in the United Kingdom. He's from a small village on the England and Wales border called Hereford.
That's interesting to hear. I've been to Western England before, only Bath and Oxford, but I've never been to Wales. And I know your dad has British citizenship. I don't know if you have British citizenship or not.
Technically, I am not a dual citizen yet, but I have the ability to get dual citizenship because of my father. I have two sisters as well, and one of them has already done the process, and she does have a passport from both the UK and the United States.
In the beginning of 2025, the UK requires an electronic travel authorization for non-British passport holders, and I know you're not a British citizen, but can you explain to me how that process works?
Honestly, Jake, I'm not 100% sure about how you go about the process. I haven't talked too much about it with my sister, but I know for a fact that it has made her traveling to the UK much easier. One of my cousins over there is actually getting married in August, I believe, and we plan to all travel, and she was joking about how much easier it will for her to be to get through customs compared to me and my other sister who don't yet have dual citizenship activated, but I know that it makes the travel process to and from the UK so much easier for people who have a passport from the United Kingdom.
And the electronic travel authorization applies to both of us as we only hold US passports. And I don't know if it makes it harder or easier on it because I've only been to the UK twice, and the last time I was there was around the beginning of 2024. I wonder how that impacts you and your family, if it's easier or harder to get into the UK.
Speaking of the Electronic Travel Authority, the last time that I was in the UK and traveled there, it was when they had first set up the system. And I signed up for it because, again, I don't have dual citizenship yet, but I was really, really worried that they weren't going to get back to me in time so that I could not make the trip to go see my family. Thankfully, though, it all went well and it didn't end up being an issue. But I think the ETA system is definitely something that is going to impact people who are not dual citizens, and it definitely makes travel to the UK much harder.
That's a nice response, by the way. As I said before, the last time I was in England was a year before they implemented the ETA, and I mainly stayed in London, but I also took day trips to Western England like Bath and Oxford. Have you been to any of those cities in Western England?
I have never been to Oxford. Obviously, it's renowned for its famous and great university there. However, I have been to Bath multiple times with my dad. It's a place he remembered a lot from his childhood growing up there. It's a great, beautiful city. The architecture is amazing, and obviously the Roman baths as a tourist draw and attraction are a great thing as well.
I'm with you, Rhys, because I've been to both cities, and I believe that there is much more to Bath and Oxford than the University of Oxford and the Roman baths. So, since you've been to Bath, why don't we focus more on Bath?
Just a beautiful, amazingly cultured city. Again, you mentioned the Roman baths. However, that's not the only thing. There's a lot of small markets in the city of Bath. The town center is really quite nice. And whenever me and my dad have gone before, specifically, there's a fudge shop. I don't know the exact street where it is, but it's a small fudge shop, and it's a really great place to get a nice sweet treat. And I think that obviously the Roman baths were there, and I think some of that architecture is still around there, and it kind of inspires the streets and some of the architecture of homes and housing in the city of Bath.
That's right, Rhys, because before I went to England, I've watched a Rick Steves video about Bath, and he said that the city is built in limestone, which is influenced by those Roman baths. And then two of the sections of Bath that impressed me are the Royal Crescent and the Circus, which is pieces of art of architecture.
When you have kind of almost a different cultural influence when compared to traditional English architecture and things like that, it makes for a really interesting and unique city like Bath being able to sprout up, even in the western part of England, which I think is very, very cool. I also think there's a small bit of Gaelic inspiration in terms of being close to Wales. That definitely also plays a role in some of the architecture.
When I was in Bath, it reminded me a little bit of Ireland.
Yeah, and Ireland is also very similar in terms of, like I said, kind of that Gaelic influence. Just a much different construction of a city in terms of architecture and even layout when compared to other parts in England. Once you get into the Midlands and even down in London, you know, it's a very different feel. I'm sure you've experienced that, given that you've been to cities like London, Jake.
Mm-hmm. And yes, I've been to London, which is touristy city, global city. Briefly talking about London, and as the classical composer Joseph Haydn from Austria, he said that Bath is the most beautiful city in Europe. And I saw that mural while walking in the streets in Bath on my way to an antique store there.
I've never actually been able to catch that mural, but that is true. I think it is, if not the most beautiful city in Europe, it's definitely one of them. I think its uniqueness standing out in the UK, which doesn't have that kind of architecture traditionally, it almost feels like you're stepping into a different pseudo-country within England. It's a very cool place.
That exceeded my expectations when I first went to Bath, because my expectation says, oh, it's just a Roman baths, it's just like a British city, but when I went there, it exceeded my expectations. I was not expecting to see these architectural wonders. I was not expecting to go to these unique shops like I went to an antique store, reminded me a little bit of the antique stores back in the States, and to a bookstore, which I didn't even know, which had a basement and felt homey in that bookstore.
That's really interesting, Jake. Yeah, most bookstores you wouldn't say have basements. But it's got almost an antiquity, like you're saying as well, given that you said it seemed like the antique store is more something you would find in the States.
I do love antiquing, and most of the antique stores or antique malls are found in the U.S., and when I went to the antique center, as they call them in the United Kingdom, it felt like in an American antique store, so it felt like I was back at home in America.
Never really thought about it like that. The last time that I was in England over this past summer, I didn't do any antiquing. However, I did do some thrifting in a similar vein, in a sense, for some clothes. But I really find that interesting. Would you say that there's a bit of American influence there, or would you say it might just be something that sprouted up in Bath that way?
It actually sprouted up to me because at first, as many people or almost everyone knows, Britain influenced America. They colonized America, and Britain's one of America's closest allies.
That's an interesting idea and concept there, that there would be kind of more a similar antiquing style to here in America. But again, you talking about antiquing just in and of itself and almost that homey feel in that bookstore you mentioned, given it had a basement. I find that the antiquity of Bath is a very, very interesting part of the travel there. Just going through the town, it does feel almost out of another time period in a sense. Do you think that is the way the roads are constructed, how they're unique with the limestone, brick?
It felt like walking through the main streets of Bath. It felt very unique. It felt like I couldn't explore anywhere else in that. And I'm sure I said this a few minutes ago, the closest I can find to this in Bath is in Ireland and Savannah, Georgia.
Really? Savannah, Georgia? That's an interesting comparison, Jake. Would you want to expand on that more? Why would you compare those two cities, given they're so far apart?
When I was in the Circus and the Royal Crescent, right between were these limestone homes, and I remember seeing these very little bridges between the main street and the houses, and it reminded me of seeing the same things down in Savannah, the same homes.
That's really interesting. I've never been to Savannah, Georgia, so I couldn't say the same, but I didn't even know that kind of limestone construction existed here in the U.S. Just a massive difference, not only in culture, but in the way we put together housing. Most of it is obviously wood and at some point brick.
I've been there several times. It's bricks, not limestone, but the limestone in Bath influenced it.
What other cities in the UK, Jake, specifically on the western side, have influenced you? Obviously, you mentioned Oxford earlier on in the podcast.
Oxford is a very nice city. Of course, it's known for the university, which reason why many people around the world come. But there's more to Oxford, and there's two things I want to highlight. It's the covered market and my favorite pub in the UK, St. Aldate's Tavern.
Earlier, a few days ago, when we were just talking about doing this podcast episode, Jake, you told me about your experience in Oxford. You told me you went during Christmas time, so you missed a lot of the touristy crowd that comes through, and it was really just locals. You even said you missed a lot of the students because obviously school's out.
You're right. So I got Oxford to myself, along with my brother and my mom. So it was like a partial family trip. So we got Oxford to ourselves, and I even played a little scavenger hunt of where Dr. Quick went to school, or I should say his department, because he is an alumnus of University of Oxford. For those who don't know, Dr. Quick, he's Dr. Rob Quick, the founder of College Radio Day Foundation, and also the director of Marshall's School of Journalism and Mass Communications. Now let's get back to Oxford, his alma mater town.
What kind of architecture, when compared to Bath, would you find in Oxford? Is it more of a traditional English style of architecture, you would say?
Yes, it's more of a traditional English architecture, like Victorian, Georgian. It's more towards the stereotypical English architecture you see in Disney movies and the media, and it has a little bit of London influence too, since it's a world-class small city due to the university.
Oxford and Bath, some distance between them, but both being Western cities in a nation, being so different in terms of their architecture, I think that really also pops the uniqueness, as we mentioned with Bath earlier. Are there any American cities that you would say Oxford is most comparable to?
To me, I say of all the American cities, including the ones I haven't been to, are probably nearby Boston or anywhere in New England, because they have Ivy League schools like Harvard and Yale.
That's also very cool to talk about, is obviously that connection to the New England area here in the States, in the far Northeast, compared to the old country in England. Obviously very similar in terms of their construction. A lot of Victorian houses and kind of an older style of not only architecture for the U.S. compared to England, but also city layout when it comes to port cities. As you get down south, I feel, in the U.S. at least, they change a lot in terms of their layout compared to some of the port cities in the U.K.
I haven't been to the port cities, but the next time I fly into London, would like to explore the port cities like Portsmouth and Brighton.
Yeah, and Brighton, a beautiful city that I've been to. Other port cities in the UK, also places like Cardiff. I really think it's interesting. Port cities are one of the cooler things about any country. They really impact trade heavily and have for hundreds of years. But I also find that they're very unique architecture given their closeness and proximity to the water.
And that water definitely shows a sign of the British Empire back in its golden days of how they traded, how they transported to other colonies, and before we transition into, like you said, the capital of Wales, Cardiff, I want to go into deeper the highlights what I did in Oxford beyond the university, and the first thing is the covered markets. Before I went to Oxford, I never knew what the covered markets were, so I stepped in and felt like a small local market, kind of like a flea market in the United States, but it's definitely like also a mix of a Victorian arcade.
That's very interesting, Jake. There's a lot of those kind of older school markets in the UK still active today. That's something that's really died out here in the U.S. in the past few years. Obviously, we do still have small farmers markets and places like the Amish market, even close by in nearby Milton, West Virginia. But it's very, very different compared to what we really have here in the U.S. in terms of shopping and in terms of shopping locally.
While I was in Bath and Oxford, I took some time to go through local shops because I don't mind the big chains like grocery stores or restaurants, but I also like to go to small local businesses. And I remember going through several stores in the covered market, and I did see a picture of King Charles when he was in the covered market.
Wow, that's very cool.
So the last thing before moving on to the Welsh capital is St. Aldate's Tavern, which is in Oxford still, and Dr. Quick and I agreed it's a great pub.
Like I mentioned before, I've never been to Oxford, so I can't have gone to this pub, but based on what Jake has told me outside of recording, it's just a lovely place where you can get a meal and have a drink. We and him talked about this also, is the difference in social drinking in the UK compared to the US.
You're right, because when I went to the British pub for the first time, I was not expecting you order at the bar.
It's a very different feel than a lot of bars, and what Jake's talking about is traditionally when you sit down, at least at a bar that serves food or a place that serves food and alcohol, you'll order a beer or whatever you're having to drink that's alcoholic from the server who comes to your table. But it's very different in the UK. In most places that I've been to, at least in terms of pubs that serve food, you go up to the bar to even order your food and place your order. You don't have a server. You sit where you can be seated, and they'll bring the food out to you and your drinks once you order them.
That's one thing that surprised me because it helps keep efficiency of the restaurant and its service. And after we've ordered and paid, because we paid first, then had the food, my family and I walked to the table at the pub, and a few minutes later, the server gave us our food.
It's almost a more homely feel, isn't it, Jake? You feel like you're more at home in an English restaurant, I feel, at least in my opinion, than when you're here in the States. It's just much more cozy, and it almost feels more connected in the fact that you're the one who's initiating seating and placing an order.
I do see that, Rhys, because I felt a bit like that, and I also felt I was a little bit of an Americanist, but mainly very British, because pubs are one thing that the Brits are proud of.
Oh, 100%, Jake. They're such an integral part of everyday life for most people in the United Kingdom. Even if you're not a very heavy drinker, I feel the pub is just a place that you go, especially in small villages, almost every night, just to see friends, to talk, to catch up on the day, current events throughout the world. It's a place where you can go to meet new people and spend time with those that you care about and love and see every day. I feel like the closeness of community in the UK is also something that is very different to that of the United States.
Before I went to England, I was saying, oh, it's a pub. It's where you get drunk. But when I went to a pub, it was not like that. It was like what you said, Rhys.
That it is a sacred place for many Brits, and I think that that's important to them, is the culture of the pub, which it's in and of itself. Pub culture is considered a thing in the UK.
It is. A pub is a culture, and speaking of cultures in regions, why don't we shift around to the Welsh capital of Cardiff?
And Cardiff, a beautiful city. My grandparents on my dad's side are both Welsh, born and raised in the city of Cardiff. My grandmother, who's still alive, God bless her, still speaks Welsh. Every time I see her, she tries to speak a little bit of Welsh to me, and it's a really interesting language. And Cardiff, a very, very interesting and important city in the UK's history.
It is, and I've never been to Wales or Cardiff, so I don't know much about Cardiff or Wales, and I feel like it's an overlooked country.
Wales, it really is. It's a beautiful place, and the Welsh tried to fight off the English for hundreds of years. Ultimately, they failed, and they were integrated into what is now the Greater United Kingdom under English control. However, today, their culture is more alive than ever. They are teaching Welsh in Welsh schools again, the language that is, as well as English, which is very important as Welsh people were not allowed to speak the Welsh language when my grandmother was growing up.
Wow, that is crazy, especially in the last 100 years. Things changed a lot.
Yes, they 100% did, Jake. You weren't allowed to speak Welsh in schools. It wasn't taught, even in Welsh cities. But a very beautiful language and a beautiful country with lots of cool cities. Back to Cardiff a little bit. It's a port city, as we mentioned before. And one of the things that I find really interesting about this, I did a paper last year for my Appalachian history class, and it was on the Welsh in Appalachia. And I specifically targeted coal miners in Appalachia, and coal is a huge part of the Welsh economy. The southern coal fields in Wales are very important to not only the Welsh economy, but to the British economy back during like the World War II days, because coal was such a very important and valuable resource. It played a major role in World War II and eventually the Allies winning the war. That being said, I've actually been to the southern coal fields and went down a mine called the Big Pit in the coal fields, and it was a very interesting experience. The mine is now defunct and coal is on the steady decline. However, that being said, Cardiff was a port city that exported lots of Welsh coal at a certain period in time in Welsh and Greater United Kingdom history.
I did not know that because I did not come from a coal field. I came from a world-class tourist destination, or tourism economy, I should say.
And Jake, you are from Florida, but that is definitely very different than growing up somewhere like this region where I'm from. Obviously, I am from the city of Huntington. But I do find that very interesting. What kind of things have you seen as somebody from a very different part of the U.S. when coming up here?
Coming up to West Virginia, I saw there's much different stuff, and the accents are one thing.
Definitely. They definitely play a role. And you're from the South, but it's a kind of almost a different kind of Southern accent you find up here.
I'm sure like the UK, they have different accents. The US is much bigger, and they have lots of different accents. And like where I'm from, I speak a little bit of Southern, a little bit of Midwestern, because people from Florida come all over the country.
Yeah, it's one of the most moved into states from other states in the United States for the last 40 or so years. Is that accurate, Jake?
Yes, that's accurate. Actually, longer than that, since the end of World War II.
Really? I didn't know that. Obviously, it's a very desired climate for many Americans to be able to live in the sun by the beaches. Do you know if it is the most migrated to city in the U.S. since that period of time?
I know within this decade, Florida is named the most moved to state in the country, and I remember in the last few years, to keep it within the topic, there's a direct flight from Tampa to London at least once a day, and it shows that British tourists love Florida.
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I'm sure they love getting out of that gloomy climate. Now, a little bit back to that. Some other things about Wales that I really enjoy, and I'm proud to say that I've been there and I'm from there, and my bloodline is connected to the Welsh people and the nation itself, are the Brecon Beacons. It's a set of mountains close to England that I have been to and walked a few of them. There's some beautiful mountains like the Skirrid and the Sugarloaf, which I've climbed both of, are just a really great trek and hike for anybody who's ever in that region of the United Kingdom. It's really beautiful, lots of green rolling pastures that you're able to see. You pass lots of sheep, and those hikes and climbs are just really, really nice.
I've never heard of those mountain ranges, Rhys. You've taught me something new about the UK.
Yeah, and there are some really cool mountain ranges within the UK. They're not as obviously as large as the ones you'd get here in the United States, like the Rockies. However, they are, or even the Appalachians for that matter. However, they are really cool and beautiful mountain ranges and scapes. The Brecon Beacons, the only ones that I have climbed in terms of mountains with multiple peaks, but they really are great hikes and climbs, and they're somewhat secluded as well, surrounded by small cities and villages that just great stops by also after you get done with a day's worth of hiking.
I've never done that before, but I did see several Rick Steves episodes about them in the Alps.
Oh, really? I think mountains across the world have played such a huge role in humans and the development of culture. And I think that even small sets of mountains like the Brecon Beacons in Wales play a massive role in the culture there as well.
They make their own cultures, like Appalachia back in our side of the Atlantic. Then we have the Rockies, has their own culture too. And back into the European side, we have the Alps, which have their own culture, and then much more around the world.
It is really interesting, even if you look at places like the Himalayas, where the tallest mountains in the world reside. In Nepal, their culture and the culture of Sherpa people, which is who they're designated as being people who are guides for climbing and climb mountains very frequently. It's really interesting how it has impacted places around the world, whether big, like the Himalayan mountains in Nepal, or small, with areas like the Brecon Beacons and Wales. So what are some other British cities on the west that you have visited to, Jake? Are there any other you've visited or you're very interested in visiting one day that you've done research on?
Based on your question, the only ones I visited were Oxford and Bath, but there's more I want to go to my bucket list. And one city on my bucket list is Cheddar, which is known for cheddar cheese. And I did research, and I never knew they had a caves. They call it the Cheddar Gorge.
I did not know that existed either, Jake. I've never been to Cheddar. Obviously, it's a very well-known city based on the name and the famous cheese that most people in the world know, at least in the Western world. Most people know what cheddar cheese is, but that's very interesting. I did not know that there was a set of caves there.
And it's not far from Bath and Bristol, because Bath and Bristol are very close to each other, and Cheddar is further west. And if you go further west in England, there's a city called Exeter. Not far, there's a cheese farm called Quick's Cheese Farm.
Ah, you mentioned this to me in the last time discussed this topic just a little bit. You want to expand on the Quick's Farm, and you mentioned to me you would also love to go there one day.
Multiple reasons. First off, Dr. Quick's family runs it. He told me that it's the best cheese in the world. I don't know because I never tried, and I do love cheese, but personally, my favorite types of cheeses from a country are from France and Switzerland. Sorry, Dr. Quick.
French cheese, very exquisite, very well known for their cheese and their love of all things cheese and bread, as well as wine, huh, Jake? But a very similar country to the UK in a lot of senses. You know, when it comes to their culture, obviously split by a very small strip of ocean when you really consider how vast they really are. What do you know about the shared culture between the French and the British?
They had a long rivalry over 1,000 years, and there's even a book I've read in high school called A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens.
Yes, A Tale of Two Cities, and based on Paris and, is it London, Jake?
Yes.
I thought so. I was pretty sure. But beautiful country France is, and again, like you mentioned, thousands of, almost probably nearly multiple thousands, years of rivalry between France and England, 100 Years' War, as they called it. Very culturally similar because of all the raiding that did happen in both countries during a warfare that was actively fought between the two European nations.
I saw that in St. Paul's Cathedral in London, the Duke of Wellington's tomb, which he defeated Napoleon during the Napoleonic Wars.
The two nations and their histories are forever tied together. So you mentioned earlier, Jake, the city of Bristol. That's a city that I went to last time I was in the United Kingdom. One of my uncles, he lives in Bristol. Me and my dad, we went and visited him with one of my cousins. And it was a great visit, a very beautiful city, obviously. The Bristol Rovers, at one time Premier League side that has now been relegated, I believe multiple times. However, Bristol, a beautiful channel city. There is a channel that runs right through Bristol, and so there's a lot of channel-side homes and apartments. It's a very interesting take on a British city.
I've never been to Bristol. I've been close to it, and the only time I interacted with Bristol was a train station. Like, that was the terminus of the train line.
There are trains within Bristol. I believe there is also a tram system in Bristol as well. It actively supports a modern tram or light railway system because traffic congestion is kind of a big deal in Bristol because it's such an old city and its roads are a tiny bit outdated. But having a tram city in the UK is not the most unique thing in the world. It is, however, quite unique here in the US. Do you know of any tram cities outside of the big famous ones like New Orleans and San Francisco?
Recently, I went to Cincinnati, and I did see a tram there kind of like the trams you see in Amsterdam, Dublin, and Lyon. And there's 2 other cities I saw in the States that have trams like the cities I mentioned in Europe I've been to. It's Austin and Phoenix.
That's really cool. I did not think that the tram system in the United States, in terms of cities that have them, expanded to that section of the West. I thought it kind of was isolated within the California area and then the East Coast.
And I forgot, too, Tampa has a little trolley, too, because they have a little section which is like New Orleans called Ybor City. I nickname it Spanish New Orleans.
Yes, Ybor City. I've heard about this place. And actually, I was in Tampa, or in Sarasota, but spent time in the greater Tampa area during a trip with some friends I had over the summer. I actually noticed the tram system there as well, kind of isolated to that section of Tampa in terms of being regional, but still very, very interesting that even a tram system is still alive and well in a small segment of a big city in Florida. It gets beautiful in that part of the state and that part of the country. It's crystal clear water and sunny, sandy beaches. You can't get much better than that.
You're right. I'm not a beach person, but your opinion, a lot of people think of that. And speaking of these natural wonders, Western England has these hilly areas, flat areas. There's some mountains you talked about in Wales.
Yeah, and it's a really, really gorgeous part of the country itself, obviously known for big cities like London, but I think that the nature in the UK is one of the things that makes it so interesting. And things like public footpaths, which allows you to pretty much travel wherever you want throughout the country on foot. You have historical parts of nature as well, obviously, if you want to consider them natural. Places like Stonehenge, which I've also been to Woodhenge, which is thought to be, I think in some pretext, even older than Stonehenge itself. It is a segment of wooden piers and pillars that come out of the ground that were placed there, obviously by early inhabitants of the UK. But yeah, I think you're right, Jake. I think there's a really interesting and deep natural influence on the culture of the English countryside.
I've never been to Stonehenge, but I've heard it's very famous and touristy. I've never heard of the Woodhenge.
It's very, very close to Stonehenge as well. My dad and I went to Stonehenge last time I was in the UK, and we stopped by the Woodhenge beforehand, and then we made it to Stonehenge, and it was quite touristy, Jake. You have to ride a bus to get to the Stonehenge. However, just about 50 years ago, you could walk right up to Stonehenge and touch it, and however, they stopped doing that because I believe people were taking a mallet and chisel and chipping out small pieces of the Stonehenge to take home.
That's messed up.
Yes, it is. But when you think of something being that famous and being such a old, ancient thing, people are bound to want to take a piece of it with them. Now that they have prevented that, there is now a rope and stuff stopping people from going up and security. It is an interesting area to see. I will note, though, Jake, it was very windy the day I went. Given that it's just completely pretty much flat, you see Stonehenge, and you also see the mounds surrounding Stonehenge. Mounds, another thing that ancient British people created, but ancient people of all types created. There are plenty of mounds here in the United States created by Native Americans.
And I definitely noticed the wind in England. I was not expecting it to be super windy when I got off of the tube, even off of the trains in England. I was not expecting the winds to get me, and they did.
Yes, they will. They will completely get you, Jake. It's very similar in terms of the way nature is and the way the geography is in the United Kingdom, I think, to Appalachia, if not even on a smaller scale because the mountains are less high. It's a lot of mountains and rolling fields. There's not so much in terms of vegetation there, in terms of trees. There are obviously some big forests in the United Kingdom. But I think that the rolling pastures and fields and hills that have been used for centuries by people to cultivate crops and to herd animals are something that definitely contributes to its windy nature.
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's very similar to me. And it's something I notice, Jake, whenever I go there, given that my dad is from there. I almost feel like I'm still at home when I'm there because it's so similar to this part of the country.
I never knew about that about you, Rhys. You actually feel at home.
I think I feel that way partially because my family is there, but partially because the culture almost feels ingrained in me. My mother, still from the United States, but also from this part of the country. She's from West Virginia in a nearby area close to Huntington. But I find it very interesting and intriguing that it almost feels like home. Have there ever been any places that you've been to, Jake, where it kind of feels like that on your travels and trips?
There's several of them, and first off is Southern California, because the warm weather, similar architecture, Disneyland, so which is why Southern California to me felt a little bit like home. And if you're talking internationally, I say Canada, because that's the country that is closest to the United States culturally.
I think that's definitely accurate, but I find that really interesting that you would say Southern California. I think that's a really intriguing take and idea when where you're from and Southern Cali are so far apart. I mean, some of probably the farthest points you can find in the country outside of California and areas in Maine.
The other two places that felt a bit like home to me is Georgia, because it's a neighboring state of Florida, and Texas for numerous reasons.
So, Jake, have you ever been to Spain? And I ask this because obviously there's a great Spanish influence on Florida as a state, but also probably part of where you're from in Tampa, as isn't Tampa a port city? So it was definitely probably used by not only the Spanish at a time, but also English settlers. So do you still see some of that Spanish influence, like in terms of European Spain rather than Latin America?
We have St. Augustine, which is the oldest city in the United States. That has a great Spanish influence. The further south you go in Florida, you'll see these Mediterranean-inspired homes. And Tampa, like other port cities like London and Bristol and Cardiff, has some immigrants. Like Tampa specifically has Cubans, Italians, Germans, and even in the Tampa Bay area, some Scottish and English.
Wow, that's really cool, Jake. I didn't realize that Tampa had kind of that same immigration track that you'd find in places like you're saying in the UK, like London, Cardiff, and Bristol. Now, something you mentioned there was St. Augustine, one of my favorite cities I've ever been to in the entirety of my time traveling anywhere. I've been to the fort in St. Augustine. As you mentioned, the oldest city in America, a very, very cool place for anybody who's never gone.
And as a person who likes traveling to UNESCO World Heritage Sites, there's lots of them in the United Kingdom. I would nominate the one in St. Augustine, the old town of St. Augustine, including the fort, as a UNESCO World Heritage Site.
And I agree. I think that if that's the oldest city in a country like the United States, which is so culturally impacted almost every other nation on planet Earth, I think it should definitely be one of those national heritage sites. So, Jake, what are some other places you would like to visit in the UK alongside places like Bristol and Cheddar?
Well, as I talked about earlier, I like to get to the second part of the Quick's Cheese Shop. It's because I love cheese, and I want to try cheese and locally produced cheese in England. And taking a tour of a local cheese shop or cheese farm in England at the same time, feeling connected to it because of Dr. Quick, that's one place I like to visit, which is Quick's Cheese Shop. Other than Quick's Cheese Shop, there's other places in Western England. This one's further up to the north, by the northern end of Wales. It's called Liverpool.
Ah, Liverpool. You want to touch some Scouse culture, is that right, Jake?
Not only that, I'm also a Beatles fan, definitely a Paul McCartney fan.
Yes, that they're one of the peoples that helped put that city on the map as one of the most well-known places in the UK and England itself. Liverpool is a really cool city. I've never been. However, I have some cousins who at one point have lived in Liverpool, and it's a really interesting place based on what I've read and heard. Lots of the most famous people in English history have come from Liverpool, and at least in terms of being pop culture figures, as you mentioned, the Beatles, but many a player for Liverpool Football Club, which is one of the most well-known football clubs in the entire world. They have a very rooted history within the city of Liverpool, and another team that plays there, who is also in the Premier League, is Everton. There's an intense rivalry between Liverpool and Everton. As a result, that's a really cool city that you should really try to travel to, Jake. I think it's a great place that you would find to be very interesting.
Definitely will. And speaking of the Premier League, one thing I learned about is don't talk about Premier League in public.
No, it's not something that should be talked about. It's a very odd thing. I'm an Arsenal fan, but me and my dad, during my travels, he has told me not to bring or wear a Arsenal jersey just for fear of a football hooligan possibly attacking me or starting an argument over some football antics or shenanigans that might be going on within the Premier League table.
That is pretty funny, but safety always comes first, and I'm going to break the fourth wall here. I tend to break the fourth wall sometimes. If WMUL was in the UK, if we talk about the Premier League, we will definitely need that Ernie G. Anderson disclaimer of views and opinions because Premier League is so controversial as politics is in the States.
Oh my gosh, I mean, football worldwide, Jake, as a sport in terms of European football is such a massive part of a lot of other countries' culture, and it's the biggest sport throughout the world for a reason, and they take it very, very seriously, not only in the UK, but in France, Latin America, Germany, all throughout most of the rest of this current modern age takes it way more seriously than America does.
This summer, we have the World Cup coming up, and I noticed the World Cup is big and not only across the world, definitely in Europe.
Yes, in the United States, Canada, and Mexico hosting this coming World Cup. I believe there will be games in places like Atlanta, New Jersey, I believe is the closest game. That and Philadelphia are the two closest games that U.S. fans who are in this part of the country in West Virginia could make the travel to if they wish to drive or fly. The U.S. will be hosting some World Cup games this summer. What do you think about that, and what do you think that means not only for the U.S., but for, I guess, maybe other countries' perception of the U.S.?
So far, that's a good question, Rhys, and I'm trying my best to answer it without having the Ernie G. Anderson thing. And so that will definitely bring a lot of tourism to the United States. It'll definitely show that how patriotic we are and shows the fans how the opportunities we give, all the attractions we see across our big country, and also our neighboring countries like Canada and Mexico.
I agree, Jake. I think it'll give a lot of people from outside of this place a great idea of what North American culture, but specifically where we're from, United States culture, is all about, because it's truly a blending of so many different things and places in the world. And I think that a lot of people, especially in the modern age of the political sphere in the U.S. and the greater world, think of the U.S. as being somewhere that is not culturally unique or significant when it really, really is. That aside, I think the last time that the United States hosted a World Cup game was in 1994 when we were the host nation for the World Cup. Brazil ended up winning that year, beating Italy in the final, a battle between Italy's Roberto Baggio and a battle between Brazil's Ronaldo Nazario. But a very cool thing that the U.S. gets to host this World Cup through FIFA.
FIFA is a well-respected international sports organization along with the Olympics, and us hosting it helps us become as a respected country and other countries to be respected as well.
I agree, and I think that something like the World Cup is a kind of a period in time on any given year when it happens where the whole world kind of stops everything and focuses on this one thing. Even the United States at times, a nation that is not the most fond of the sport that we call soccer, but that is mostly known as football. Even a lot of the time, if the U.S. makes the World Cup, and especially in a year where we're hosting this massive world event, the U.S. will focus and the entire world is focused on this one event rather than disputing with one another.
Sports is a time to put politics aside, put everything stressful aside, and enjoy life.
I agree with that, Jake. It's one of the great things that humans have been able to create is sports. It gives a sense of not only national, but regional and local pride on a pro level. And I think it's really, really an awesome thing that we get to host the World Cup. Now, going back towards England, obviously you said you'd like to visit Liverpool. Is that the last and final city that you'd really, truly like to visit in that part of England?
In Western England, there's few other ones, but I can't think of them at top of my head.
You mentioned Brighton earlier on in the podcast. Have you visited Brighton?
Never been to Brighton, and I think that's in the eastern part of England, so which is why I'll save it for another time. And there's one thing I definitely enjoy about British restaurants is that they ask you if you have any allergies.
Yeah, they do. They tend to do that. They tend to ask you if you're allergic to anything. And there are some restaurants, I think, in the States that think about that, especially when they work with stuff that would cause allergies a lot, specifically nuts and things of that nature. But I do find that interesting as well. We mentioned it earlier on in this podcast, but I believe that the homely nature of British serving and British service work is really interesting when you compare it to almost a very odd way to do it that we do it here in the States. In some cases, it feels like in the States you're simply talking to a robot in human form.
You're right.
Cases. When in comparison, what other kind of services that the United Kingdom offers that you would say you really like and might differ in terms of serving not only food? Is there anything? You said you rode the train system. Was the service there different to you than it would be on maybe an American airline or an American train system?
Yes, it's definitely more efficient, and the good thing about the train system is anyone of all ages can access it, whether you're young or old, if you have a disability, or if you can't afford to rent a car. That's one good thing about the train systems across Europe. England has a good train system, but I think it's more efficient in France and the Netherlands.
Wow. You said, have you been to Amsterdam, Jake?
Yes, that's the first European city I've visited.
I bet that was really cool to be your first European city you visited. I feel like we mentioned earlier, Bath is very unique for the United Kingdom. I feel Amsterdam is almost a very unique city in terms of its respective comparison to all countries throughout Europe.
Because Amsterdam, a world-class touristic city, is a very influential city across the world, even in England and our home country of America.
I feel like it definitely has a far-reaching influence that is very interesting to look at. I've never been, but would love to travel one day to the city of Amsterdam. I think it's one of the most beautiful architectural cities in the world, and I find that it has such a unique blend of different ideals and ideas within the city itself.
I know it's in the Netherlands, but do love the Dutch architecture. Also love the French architecture too. And English architecture is very broad. Even British is even more broad. So if you talk to me about English architecture, you talk about what city, which one?
Exactly. I mean, there's so many different styles of architecture in the United Kingdom. It's very interesting, even just going through the different countries. You go through Scotland, it's very different than what you can find in England, which has a very broad-reaching scape and way of architecture. I find that really intriguing as well, Jake, the fact that such a small country that you can travel through by car like that, with the snap of fingers, when compared to the United States, is very cool to think about the architectural change that happens in such a short span of mere miles.
Before we wrap up, and I'll briefly mention Northern Ireland, because I've been to Northern Ireland, but since it's by Ireland rather than England and Wales, I'll save it to another time, so I wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, Northern Ireland, a place I've never been, Jake, but the fact that you have been is very interesting, and that's a place, not only Northern Ireland, but the Greater Ireland, which is its own independent nation from the United Kingdom, I would love to visit as well. I think that they have a very interesting shared Gaelic culture with Wales and parts of Scotland, and even England to a certain extent, but that's really interesting that you got to visit a place like Northern Ireland, which has had so much strife and been such a area of conflict for that part of the United Kingdom, is really, really cool. And I look forward to hearing what your thoughts are on it next time you do an episode.
I might do an episode on Ireland or not, and several years ago, I knew a friend from Ireland.
Very, very cool stuff. I've actually never met an Irish person, but I'm sure they are lovely, given that they are relatively close to the culture from which I come from. I find that very interesting, and I'm sure your travels in Ireland were very, very awesome and cool, and if you do discuss them, I cannot wait to hear about it.
That's the reason why I brought Northern Ireland up, because it is connected to Wales and also the city of Bath in England and the Republic of Ireland.
Yes, it is, and those four places, at least in terms of the nations, in terms of Northern Ireland being almost its own nation controlled by England, I find very interesting. But the comparison to Wales, Scotland, and the Greater Irish Republic is very, very cool.
Wait, there's one more thing. It's advising time. This is where the host and guest gives you tips and tricks on this episode's featured destination. Is there anything else you like to add, Rhys? Anything else about Western England or Wales you want to say?
For any listeners who have not traveled to that part of Europe, who have never been to England, or if they have only stayed in the eastern part and been in London, the western area is a great place to travel. You'll see great nature. You'll stop and eat great food at great pubs and meet awesome, amazing people who have a really, really interesting blend of culture between the Welsh and the English, given that a lot of those cities are very close to the Welsh border. And if you manage to explore into Wales, going to Cardiff and going to some of the greater and bigger cities in Wales is also a very cool experience. It's a different culture than England, but yet it's very similar. So if anyone who's listening has never been, again, and you get the chance, it's a trip that I would highly, highly recommend any of those out there.
Before we end off the episode, first of all, thank you for being part of this, and I'll give you my advice too, since Rhys gave advice for those who aren't listening. For my advice who are listening, Virgin Atlantic is one of my favorite airlines. It's a British Airlines. It has that homey feel. It has a more casual, laid-back feel compared to British Airways. Haven't been on British Airways, but I heard stuff that's more professional, like the ones in the States. So Virgin Atlantic is very homey and laid back. And also, if you're eating at a restaurant, expect eating at Disney World. Why did I say that? Because they'll ask you if you have any food allergies or not. And the other advice I have is card is king.
Yes, it is, Jake. And we talked about this a little bit as well a few days ago when we were discussing this podcast episode. Card is king in the United Kingdom. Cash is not something that is circulated very often anymore. And we also talked about this, Jake. You really only see a pound note during times when you may go to a historical site like a cathedral or church or one of those historical sites that Jake mentioned seeing where they have donation boxes. Outside of that, you really do need a card. And I would suggest for any Americans who wish to travel to the United Kingdom, put that card on your phone so you don't have any possibility of losing it. Because if you lose your card there and you don't have it on your phone, it might be time to head back home.
That's a smart tip, and nobody wants to do that.
Well, Jake, thank you for having me on this episode of Travel Podyssey, and I'm very excited to see and hear more about your next episode and possibly get on another one while you do this for Dr. Quick's class.
Thank you for this, Rhys. And now we got into the point of the show that if you enjoyed this show, you can listen to again on YouTube, Spotify, WMUL, SoundCloud. And as this show is probably going to be aired on the Cutting Edge's airwaves, we have other programs like Holiday Hour. We also have award-winning news and Marshall Thundering Herd sports coverages. And we also have other musical programs like Rocking the Herd, Rolling with the Oldies, and more. So, I'd like to say thank you for traveling on the Travel Podyssey with me and Rhys. And what's the next episode going to be? You're going to find out in the next episode of the Travel Podyssey.